In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how we can take our skeleton that we created from the earlier part, and we're going to go take our meshes and then get it bound to the skeleton so we can start putting some animation on this. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to show you is how to take the display of our joints that you see here, and we're going to be able to change the display of this, how large they show in here. So we're going to be able to go under display, then go to animation, and then go to joint size and open this thing up, and you can see there's a nice little slider here, so you can actually control how large you want the different joints to be on here. And you can see some of our joints are actually a little bit smaller than others. If you select them, you should be able to see there's a radius on here. You could set this to maybe something like 5, and you can see that it's going to grow a lot larger. You can select all the different joints in there. If you want them all to be the same size, we could select this thing and then go to select and then go to select by hierarchy, and we've got everything kind of set here. At that point, we could just put a size of 1 for our joints, and they would all be the same size. I think I had a control on there. Whenever you build the skeleton, it tries to do specific sizes based off of maybe where that joint lays in the chain. So if you don't really want that functionality, we can just select all the joints like that pretty easily and then change that. And then now when we go to display animation joint size, we can kind of crank this up a little bit and get it to the exact size that you're probably looking for your display. It just makes it a little bit easier to kind of grab some of these things and see the different joints that you have. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to select my skeleton. I just need to select the root joint that we have here. I'm going to open up my folder that I made, this groups, and you can see all the different body parts that I have here like this. So I'm going to take everything. Actually, I'm going to select this, hold down Control and select this one, and then hold down Shift and select all the other pieces that you see here. So the skeleton select first, and then all the other pieces that I want to bind to that skeleton, or I've selected those afterwards. My time slider probably looks a little bit different than yours does. That's because I set this to a -100 right in through here, and this is set to a -100. This shows you how far back the time slider can actually go. This is the absolute range that the time goes back to on here. So I've got it at -100 because at 0 I want it to be doing whatever the animation is. So I'm going to hold this bind pose that we're going to do. I'm going to do it at a negative frame, so if you don't want to see it, you don't have to look at that stuff. You can just set this to like 0 like this, and you would never see this bind pose thing that we're doing. So I'm just going to drag that thing all the way over. It's at a -100, and you can click and drag this all the way over here as well. So we're at a -100 frame, and we're just going to go back into the rigging portion here, and then we're going to go to skin, and we're going to go to bind skin. Let's just go ahead and open up the option box for this and take a look at this thing. So it's going to bind to the entire joint hierarchy. These are all the default settings that we have here for this thing. And the bind method is closest distance. It's going to bind a vertex that's the closest to one of these joints that you see here. Skinning method, there's a bunch of different skinning methods. I'm just going to leave it on classic linear. And this normalize weights, I'm going to do I'll leave it on the interactive and take a look at that. I think that's going to be okay for us. Weight distribution, we'll just go by distance, and we could allow this multiple bind poses. For most game engines, I think we're going to want this max influence to be 4, and what that is saying, for each vertex, it's going to get bound to these different joints. One vert can be affected by 4 different bones at any given time. So like this vertex here could be affected by here, 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 and here for these 4 different joints. And that becomes pretty important. 4 is a pretty good max influence for this. So we're also going to just say we're going to maintain this max influences, and we'll do the colorized skeleton. So we'll go ahead and hit apply for that, and it's going to go ahead and bind these things up. You can see it's already going to give a color for these different joints that we have here, and we can select a joint and we can start to put it on the rotate tool and see what we've got here. So You can see we're gonna have to do some work to kind of fix this up, but at least it's starting to have some of the skinning that we're looking for on this thing. Okay. All right, now that we have all of our pieces bound to these different joints, let's go ahead and start looking at how we can fix up some of the weighting issues that we're encountering. So let's do something simple, like let's take the jaw that you see here, and we could 100% weight this entire thing to this one bone that we see here. Let's go to skin, and we're going to go to this paint skin weights tool and go to the option box and go ahead and open this thing up. Let me pull this in on the other monitor here so we can see this. So when we're in this mode with this tool, we can actually take our cursor, hover it over the joint that we want, right click, and say select influence. And you can see now it's going to select this joint, and we can actually start painting weights onto this thing. If I hold down B and then click and drag left or right, I can control the size of my brush that you see here. And what we're going to do is we could do this paint mode that you see here, and we're going to put it on replace, and this is the kind of fall off that we have. This is a kind of a harder fall off, and this is a softer fall off, so depending on if you know how you want to build that thing up. So it's possible that we could paint this whole thing, because I know that I want this whole thing to have this one value of 1 for what we're painting, and where opacity is at 100%, we can just hit flood, and then we can flood the whole thing for that entire object. So I'm going to click off of this here real quick, and then we'll select this bone, and then we'll put on the rotate tool. I'm tapping E for that, and now we can rotate this thing and then check this out. So everything's working okay with the jaw, and it's pretty apparent, but we've definitely got some problems with the teeth and the upper part of the head kind of following along with this. So let's select this piece of geometry that you see here, and then we'll go back to our paint skin weights tool. So we'll go to skin, paint weights tool, go to the option box again for this. This time we're going to select this joint here for the head, what we've created. So we can right click on here and say select influence. That's one way you can do it, or you can come through this different stack that you see here, and it's got our hierarchy listed, and you would be able to find that joint for the head. So now with this, I can just paint a value of 100% for this thing right in through here like this. And now I can select off of this. One thing to note, as we're coloring this thing, you can see we can get a black and white gradient to show us the values of black is not going to be weighted to a particular joint, and if it gets pushed towards white, then it's moving towards 100% of being weighted to that particular joint. It's possible that we can use this multicolor feedback. It might be a little bit difficult for you to kind of understand exactly what's weighted to what, but you can see each joint has its own color, and it's going to try to give you an indication as to what's weighted to what thing. So if you like that color feedback, go ahead and use that, but I think I'm going to be using this just black and white. Sorry. So if you want that multicolor feedback, you can hit this thing here like this. We also have X-ray joints on, and if we turn that off, you can see how it kind of interacts with the geometry. So we really probably want that turned on as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click off this here, and then select this joint and tap E for the rotate tool, and then now we can kind of see what's going on with the head here if we're able to do something like this. And we're going to go take the jaw and be able to move this. So we still have some movement going on here. So if it becomes a little bit difficult, it is possible that we can flood with just vertices. So instead of that whole object being flooded, we can go to F9, or we can right click over there and say vertex, and we could select this vert. I'll put it on the pick tool. I'm going to hit Q for that, and let's just go over here. The other thing we can do that's kind of cool is we can grow our selection. So I'm going to just select this vert here like this at the very tip of this. Maybe it's easier to see from the back side. So I'll just select this vert here, and I can hit shift and then the arrow key, which is really the period key, and that will grow that selection out. And I'm going to hit it another time, so you can see I've grown those selection verts out. So again, that's the shift and the little kind of arrow key, which is the period key right next to the comma key, and that grows out that selection that you see there. So now that I have those verts selected, let's go back to our paint skin weight tool. So I can get to it here, or we can always get back to it from this paint skin weights tool right there. And this time I'm just going to hit flood, and it's going to make sure that those verts are 100% weighted to the joint that we have designated, and that should still be on our head. It's going to preserve that selection for us. So now this time, whenever we select the joint here, I'm going to hit F8 to go into object mode, select this joint, tap E, and then start to rotate this thing. And now you can see everything's working the way that we would expect for that particular part right there. One thing I did forget to do is actually make a skeleton for the tongue, which is no big deal. We would just want to have an emotion on this thing right now for the example that we're kind of looking at. But I'll select this tongue, and let's just go back to our tool that we had, and let's go ahead and flood that entire thing to that head joint like this. Okay, and so then now whenever we rotate our jaw that we have here, you can see the tongue is going to stay behind, and if we move this portion of the head, oops, got the brow, if we rotate this portion of the head, you can see the tongue is going to kind of follow along with that as well. So let's go down here and let's look at something like the arms here, and we'll paint these up real quick. I'm just going to right click over that joint that you see right here and say select influence, and it's possible you can use a you can use your mouse for this thing. If you have a Wacom pen and a tablet, you can use the Wacom pen, and that's where I really like to paint weights with the Wacom pen. It makes life a little bit easier. So I'm going to tap B and then click and drag, make this a little bit smaller, and I'm going to get this thing pretty much 100% weighted to this joint here. Now I'm going to start working on this rotation that you see here. So I'm just going to right click over here and say select influence, and then paint something that looks kind of like this for this area. Now it's possible you can smooth too, so there is a smooth function right here, but if you hold down shift, you can actually smooth out that transition, and it just kind of temporarily turns on that smooth. So while you're painting, just hold down shift, and that's going to soften that area up. So I'm going to keep working down through here. I'm going to say select influence here, and I'm going to paint 100% like this. Hold down shift and smooth it out, smooth out the results a little bit. I'm going to go to this one right here, select influence. So you might have to kind of reposition your cursor a little bit just to grab onto those joints, but it shouldn't be too difficult for you to do that. I'm just going to weight this 100% down here like this, and hold down shift and then kind of smooth out the results. And then now we can kind of test this thing out like this. So I'm going to take this piece here, hold down shift, select this joint, hold down shift, select this joint, hold down shift and select this one, and rotate, and I should be able to rotate everything all together at one time like this. So the arm's starting to look pretty good. Obviously the chest is not looking so great. One thing we could do to kind of help ourselves out while we paint these weights, you can see I'm painting weights and I'm kind of moving things after the fact to kind of check that out. That's one way of doing it. Might kind of slow things down, but what we could do is just make a real quick animation for ourselves that kind of helps with the deformation on this stuff. So I'm going to select the entire hierarchy. I'm going to select my skeleton that I have. I'm going to go to select, go to hierarchy like this, and you can see we're on frame -100, and I'm going to click the translate right here in the channel box, and then hold down shift and then click rotate. So that's going to give me all these things to work with here. Alright, now that they're selected, let's just go ahead and right click over it and say key selected, and you can see it's going to turn this area red, which means we have keyframe data in there, and you can also see on the time slider it's going to give a little red tick right here for us actually having a key on there. So now we can move it to some other time, like let's just move it forward 10 frames like this, and I can take this part of the arm and we can hold on shift and select these things just like we did before, and hold on Q and then select, because this rotation manipulator was kind of getting in the way. And now I can just rotate this thing up like this, and then I'll go ahead and select this again, and let's just go right click, say key selected. And now that we have that set, we can just come to our time slider down here and then scrub back and forth between this thing that we see here. Let me go ahead and close this up here. Why that becomes an advantage for us is when we're actually painting weights on this thing, or even let's say this part of the body, and we go here to go to skin, paint skin weights, and we're working on this thing, we don't have to leave the tool to kind of check the animation. If I right click and say select this influence, and then I'm just painting the weights right within here, I can actually take this little slider and I can slide this thing around, and then I can start to kind of interactively fix whatever problems I see with this thing. So I'm just going to weight this up a little bit more, select this joint here, so I'm going to right click and say select influence, and I'm trying to select this bone here, and you can see I can kind of start painting this up to where it's closer to a value of 1, and I'll just go straight through this whole area kind of here, and when I can hold down shift and smooth that out after we're done, and then we can do the slider here. So you can see I'm starting to make sure that this is not affecting anything, the arm movement is not affecting anything for this part that we see here. I can keep going a little bit higher here, select influence, and then start painting this area right here for the verts, and then hold down shift and kind of smooth through there a little bit like this. And again, I'm going to be able to do this slider. Since I'm only working with a small part of this animation that we have here, we can go ahead and put this at maybe like 200 would be a good number. I'm going to put this at 200 here and 200 here like this, and so then now we can get a little bit smoother with this time slider thing that we see here like this. I'll select off of that real quick, and then now we can kind of check this like this right here. Okay, I'm going to attempt to move a little bit faster through the entire weighting process. So I'm going to select the body real quick, and then we're going to go to skin, paint skin weights, and go to the option box for this thing. And we're just going to do a little bit more of what we've been looking at already. We're going to right click over this, say select influence, and we're going to give this a 100% weighting in this area, and I'm just going to be pretty rough with things and maybe try to fix things a little bit later after getting this all kind of finished and through here. So it's possible I could go to the root there, and I'm actually want to work my way back down through the tail. So again, it's possible to select this stuff through here, through this menu, and then hold down shift and then smooth this out on both sides. And I can go to the next one, just kind of paint this thing out, hold down shift and kind of smooth this. Go to the next one, paint this thing up, hold down shift to kind of smooth that out. Select this one, hold down shift to kind of smooth, and I'll do the tail end, very last part like that for this thing here. And we can at least check that right now real quick. So again, we could just select this bone and hold down shift and select these other bones afterwards, and then put on the rotate tool. I'm going to hit E, and I'm going to use this part of the manipulator here to kind of have this thing move up and down. And it doesn't look too bad. And again, we've already got some animation on this part. We could just go to like another maybe area, like maybe -90, and then rotate this thing down like this, and then shift right click on here and say key selected, and maybe go to -80, and I'll just put that back on the rotate tool and rotate this back up like this. And now we can select those. I'm holding down Shift to select them all, and then say right click and key selected. And so then now I got this to kind of play around with, right? And I can kind of check the mesh with this weighting that we see here. Now this is where when you get to this level, you might want to turn off this color feedback. And I was trying to see if we could actually just turn this off altogether. So I'm going to right click and say select influence for this, and this should actually turn on and off this display of this, but I don't know if I've got some kind of bug going on right now with this version of Maya. Doesn't make me feel too confident about it, but it is what it is, right? So I was going to keep working through here on this, just kind of smooth this stuff out just a little bit. So this is 100% weighted to this bone. If I start to smooth that out, you can see how these start to travel closer towards this one. I'm just going to right click on this one and say select influence. I want these to be a little bit stronger in through here and smooth this thing out like that. Select this one. And this process of skin weighting and painting skin weights is just going to be a lot of trial and error and going through it and doing this process a lot of different times. It was very difficult for me to do this type of work at the very beginning whenever I first started doing it, but now it's just kind of like, you know, you might fight against the computer a little bit, but you just kind of push through it. And this weighting thing really is just kind of a push and pull between, you know, what joint do you want to be pulling on that vert, and you as the artist get to kind of paint that influence. So I think that's starting to look a little better. It does feel like this part dips in quite a bit as it curls in right in through here. So I'm going to right click over this root that we have here and then harden that area up just a little bit more. So you can see we're going to hold that area a bit more. And that's another reason why this animation thing kind of comes, and it's pretty important because you got to check how this thing deforms over time. And it's still moving quite a bit in through there. So let's see here. Okay, so I think that's looking better on that part. And really, a lot of the rest of what we're going to be doing has pretty much already been shown to you as far as like how we get this thing weighted up. You know, we got certain things like this this eyeball that we see here, and we just right click over this and say select influence and just flood that thing. You've already seen the arms. The legs are going to be very similar process. Now the only thing that we have to kind of check with this thing, with the animation on this, is if we have something like a frame right here where we're holding these positions, and then maybe the next frame immediately right after that, so we're on -90, and we'll do -89, we could move this thing to where it just pops through, kind of like that right there, and then we'll key it. And then I'm going to turn off the skeleton that I've got. I put this all on a layer, so that's pretty easy to make a new layer group. You can just make something here and you can call it skeleton layer, and I put my skeleton in a group, so you can just select the root and hit Control G and then name it skeleton. And then once I have that, I just would go over to this skeleton and say add selected objects, and that's going to make it real easy for you to just turn on and off your skeleton. So now I can kind of check things like this, what we see here, if I want to see this eye kind of coming through. So let's go to the side view so you can get a better view of what that would look like. So you can see it's just going to be more of an on-off kind of thing. So I am still experimenting a little bit with this, how you can kind of animate elements, but that's one way that you could do it is just having them turn on and off. The other thing that we could potentially do that I'm still kind of investigating, and I believe this will work, is in Unreal Engine. You can take joints and you should be able to give a scale like this of 1, and let's set a key for this, and then you should be able to do something like this. Let's lower this amount of this slider, what we can actually see here, just to make this bigger and through here. You should be able to do something like taking this thing and giving it a scale of something very, very small, like 0.001, and essentially it's like turning it off, but not really. And we can go to this frame here and put that back to 1, and then keying that. So I think you're going to have different options for this. You could either move something into place to kind of make it appear to come on and off, or you can see we're already in place right here like this, but because we're scaling this down really quickly, it feels as if we're turning it on and off like that, and it does definitely show up at these angles that we see here like this, but for more of our side view, it doesn't necessarily feel that way. It might feel a little bit more as if it's just kind of turning on or off kind of thing. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this is we do have the ability still to kind of move these elements around. So not only can we do something where we're turning it on or off, we could even do things like just slightly moving it a little bit, and then kind of maybe even doing this kind of thing for scale. So there's probably some very interesting stuff that can be done with this stuff. I'm also going to turn on the skeleton here too. So if it is possible for us to do scaling, it might be possible for you to do some things like this, where if we're just kind of going with smaller values with this, you might be able to get away with some things that kind of feel as if maybe it was breathing, something like that. But let's check this real quick, maybe in this area, and because I wanted to see more about kind of chest breathing or something like that. So you might be able to do something with that and kind of get away with it, and might just have the appearance of some subtle motion that's kind of going on in the background of this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and load up the final version of this file, and then let's take a look at the final weighting. Okay, here's the final file, and you can see what I was talking about. There's actually a skeleton that was made for the tongue, so the tongue can actually animate on here. But very similar to what we looked at with the eye kind of set up, and then the brow and things like that. So we can take these pieces and go take a look at the weights that were painted for this. So if we just kind of go in through here and then maybe step through the different things for this. So really there shouldn't be any weighting on this world root here. There is a little bit of influence on there. That'd be best if I took that off. Something else that I did for this final file that we didn't take a look at is I have a few different roots on here. So let me open this up so I can show you on the outliner what I'm talking about for this. So under skeleton, you can see I've got a body root, and then this is just this bone that we have here, and it's duplicated 2 times, and I called one a pelvis hips and then pelvis body. What that allows me to do is if I take this pelvis body, I can rotate around this point that you see here, and if we got the pelvis hips, we can rotate this thing right and through here like that. I might actually need another one for the tail. What would that allow me to do is have a root that's kind of in this position right here, and then I could have all this kind of independent motion for the body here and this part here and then the hips, and then anything that you would do with the root wouldn't necessarily affect that. You can see if I take the body root, it would move everything kind of around for that. So that's how things were just set up for that, like this. And the reason it's not working is I'm actually just selecting joints now at this point, and I should be choosing the actual controllers that I made for this thing on this. So you can see these other parts could move independently of this part. That's getting a little bit more into the rigging part, but I just wanted to show you as far as a skeleton was set up. It's possible to have joints that sit directly on top of each other, and then they're just kind of used for different purposes where you need a point where everything kind of moves about, but you need independence for maybe this part, and this part. So it's possible that you can duplicate that joint and still have everything rooted to like this main root thing here that you see in this area. Okay, so I'm going to go select this thing again. We're going to just go back to our skin weights and then just kind of move through these different parts so you can see kind of some of the values that were painted on these things. And again, it's not none of this I would say is perfect, but I think it's pretty good for what I need in here. So like this area probably shouldn't have any of the brow put on there, but if we select this different piece of geometry right in through here, if I can grab a hold of it, then we can actually see some of the weights that were painted for the brow here, like this and through there. And so that just allows that piece to kind of deform based off of however you move those different joints that you see on there. And we could select something like the leg and take a look at those. I'm going to try to right click and say select influence, so we got this right hip, and you can see we've got some weighting here on the knee where it kind of, as this rotates here, it kind of pulls on this a little bit. I'm going to right click on here and say select influence. You can see this is the kind of influence that we've got going on through there on this. And the other thing is for the bottom part of the leg. Let's scroll down here a little bit, and you can see the ankle, foot. So again, it is kind of a tedious process, at least for me, to get all this kind of set up. But it's definitely well worth it after everything is kind of all set up. The fun part, I think, is actually just being able to see your creation kind of moving and animating after you've got all the work kind of set up and all the work is done for this thing.